So welcome to my build guide on the super fun Lightning Storm Landslide Hybrid Speed Farming Plus Boss Hunting Season 2 Progression build. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly preface this video by saying that if you haven't read all the changes that are coming to the Druid in Diablo 4 Season 2, be sure to check out my other video that'll cover all the notable changes and recommended ways to progress and get a head start in Season 2 and some of the best builds as well. And onto the build that I personally want to try out the most, we have a Lightning Storm variant, which of course, if you don't want to spec into Landslide just yet for the actual single target damage, you don't have to. It can focus solely on Lightning Storm, and you can change up your key passive as well to the Perfect Storm, or if you want, you can go with Earth and Might if you have the right legendary aspects that have dropped to support this, to convert your, say, Storm skills into, or benefiting from this. So basically you can go with Lightning Storm, but later on I do want to transition into Landslide and Lightning Storm hybrid with Nature's Fury, which again has a chance to trigger a spell of the other element from either a Storm or Earth skill. And now there's actually in Season 2 a new buff to it, as I explained earlier, which is that the skill that is triggered for free will actually benefit from both Storm and Earth passives and whatnot, right? Which is why over here under the hybrid sort of passives, I'm taking and pretty much maxing all of them, and also taking an extra bit on my amulet to basically allow my triggered skills, Earth or Lightning or Storm skills, to be able to benefit and double dip from each of these, right? So that should be a pretty massive damage increase. So I'm not going to go into too much depth on the skill tree here, but essentially you want to take a generator, usually Wind Shear for range, max Lightning Storm, max Immobilization here, and then max Landslide, get the Terra modes. I think this will probably be the best, as you will be able to immobilize enemies a lot with your Lightning Storm and even Poison Creeper here. And then you want to take Earthen Bulwark for Unstoppable. Cyclone Armor is just nice for some extra, say, resist, right? These are just sort of filler points down here for some extra defense, some other passives. Here under the Storm though, or Electric Shock type Lightning Storm synergy passives, I like to max out these for the extra lightning bolts that you can call down, an extra immobilization chance, because in a Paragon glyph, there's actually an update to it where your lightning bolts and also lightning dancer from the aspect, the bolts from here can also be buffed from that new Paragon glyph, right? So I'll get to that later. And then here we have some extra passives for Earth skills. I like to take Petrify because you can deal some extra multiplicative critical strike damage because your landslides are going to crit a lot. And this will also allow you to generate some more spirit by killing enemies. And finally, for the key passive, you can take Nature's Fury, or again, you can do a variant if you want and not do Landslide and just go for like Earth and Mind if you have the legendary aspect for it, or just go with Perfect Storm. Now for equipment really quick, again, this is sort of theory crafted as we haven't obviously tested anything in Season 2 just yet, right? But for one of the armor pieces, I like to take the Symbiotic aspect to be able to reduce your cooldowns whenever you trigger your Nature's Fury, and namely this will reduce the cooldown on your Earthen Bulwark, right, which will be really helpful for keeping you alive and also making you unstoppable. And later on there's also a set of unique pants called Tibault's Will, which actually gives you primary resource and increased multiplicative damage whenever you become unstoppable. And this is on top of if you take the ultimate or Grizzly Rage, which will make you unstoppable. This will be another way to trigger it. But this actually drops from Duriel, so it's not like the most reliable, or it's not something that you will be able to get early on most likely, right? And Tempest Roar also drops from Duriel, so both of these items I didn't put into this build planner because they're more like endgame items that you would only be able to get once you put Duriel on the farm, right? And so the purpose of this build would be to get to that point to start farming Duriel, and once you do get those super drops like Tempest Roar, you can start replacing some of your gear with that, or even transitioning to another build such as the Wernado build, right? Which this build with its Paragon and skill setup, you can very easily, and even some of the aspects of course, you can easily transition into a Tornado build using basically almost the same Paragon setup. But anyhow, coming back to equipment, on another piece on chests, I like to take or pants rather, actually, chest or pants, any defensive one. I like to take Disobedience for some extra armor. This is again being changed in Season 2. It actually gives even a higher percentage of armor, but armor is only going to be benefiting physical resistance, right? And so I also have Cyclone armor in my skills to get some extra resistances, and you also get resistances from some Paragon points too. But of course, this can be adjusted to a different one depending on what you need. And also the affixes on your gear. For example, on my helm, I have poison resistance because Duriel is like a poison boss, so I figured poison resist would probably be the best one for farming Duriel, but you can go with whatever you prefer. And then below for gloves, for the offensive aspect, I want to take the Steph or Aftershock aspect where landslides can hit twice whenever they trigger or they're cast. For the other piece of defensive gear, I took the Mending Stone, which is also a dungeon aspect. So this should be quite helpful, especially combined with Symbiotic aspect, where your Earthen Bulwark should be able to be up quite frequently. So this will give you some extra shielding and duration on your Earthen Bulwark. And then for boots, you can take Wind Striker. This is also a dungeon aspect. For weapon, I want to take the double dipping type aspect, which is natural balance. But you do have to get this to drop, or you can perhaps gamble for it. This allows your Storm and Earth skills to gain additional crit chance or critical strike damage. But again, with the new changes to Nature's Fury, the triggered skill will be able to benefit from both effects, right? So it's a huge double dipping on a two-hander, which is another sort of multiplier on top of that as well, right? So that's really good. And notice how, by the way, on the offensive aspects here, or offensive affixes here rather, I took damage to crowd control, damage to close, and damage to distant. And that's because there's been a few changes to Paragon glyphs with Earthen Devastation first of all. This is not reflected on the build planner just yet, but if you look at Blizzard's patch notes, we'll see that Earthen Devastation was updated, where if you have, for the amount of crowd damage to crowd control that you have, it'll actually increase your critical strike damage of your earth skills multiplicatively, right? So this will actually incentivize you to get damage to crowd controlled, and plus you will be crowd controlling enemies a lot with your immobilizing with your lightning storm, so that's cool. And then the other change is with Thunderstruck, where the total amount of your damage to close and damage to distant will be added to your storm skills too, right? Or multiplicatively too. So this is another change that has not yet been updated in the character planner. So Thunderstruck is right over here. So as you can see, this has not been updated on the planner, but it will be changed, and it's why I'm taking these stats on these offensive pieces. And by explaining that, I actually realized I made a slight mistake with my weapon of choice, because I had a two-handed axe here, but I realized it doesn't have the damage to crowd control innate affix that the staves do, so I actually changed my axe over to a staff here, right? So because it has that innate damage to crowd control enemies, which I just explained would benefit earth skills further. So that's a quick change I just made. But moving on, we also have for the necklace Lightning Dancer, because this with a new Paragon glyph will be able to scale further. If we check out the Paragon glyph real quick, it's I believe called Electrocution right here. So as you can see, the extra lightning bolts that you get from Lightning Dancer, and also from your passives, the lightning passes, the lightning bolts that you call down can get up to like over say 300 to 400% extra damage with just this Paragon glyph alone, which is pretty insane from the looks of it. Moving on back to gear, we also have Umbral. This is a dungeon aspect, but you only can get 1 out of 4 resource generated if you use the dungeon aspect, which is way weaker than the maximum drop. But it's pretty rare to get this as a drop, so you might want to gamble rings for it. And now for the other ring, you can have a couple of choices, with one being the Crash Stone aspect, which will give you some extra critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies, which will be a dungeon aspect as well. But I don't think I don't think the crowd control enemies aspect works on bosses as much, so it might not be as good. So personally, I think I'm gonna roll with the Inner Calm instead for some more consistent damage, because it also benefits your Lightning Storm. And basically when you're channeling and you're standing still, you'll be able to benefit from this like pretty frequently, right? The maximum amount, which is 30% multiplicatively, which is a lot. For Paragon, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You can just check out my build below. For exploit, this is the vulnerable glyph. I'm not sure whether there's a better choice in this, but it would still allow you to even just trigger vulnerable, which would be like at least a 20% damage multiplier. So it might just be pretty good just for that, because Druids don't really have other ways to trigger vulnerable aside from some like pretty niche skill choices. So I'm not sure whether this is the best choice, but it seems pretty decent, especially compared to some of the other glyphs. But for the other ones, I have Tectonic, which is the new Earth glyph, which will increase your lucky hit chance and also increase your critical strike damage with Earth skills. Great for single target with Landslide. Then you also have Earth, or I rather also have Earth and Sky here. And then I take the legendary node Thunderstruck here. Oh, and before I forget, here I have Earth and Devastation, which is being updated, right? So both Earth and Devastation and Thunderstruck are being updated as I just mentioned. Next, I also have the Electrocution aspect that I talked about as well to benefit your Lightning Dancer. And by the way, Lightning Dancer is a drop, so it probably will have to be found and won't be on the season journey because it was on the season journey last season, so it'll probably rotate out. So that's one more thing to consider. Anyhow, for my next glyph, I like to have Fulminate for just some extra lightning damage. You can swap this out for something else if you decide to transition into a tornado build later on, because this is specifically for lightning damage. And then for the last part here, this is just like basically the closest path to Ancestral Guidance, which is a pretty strong legendary node in and of itself. We're not really taking anything else special right here. For Spirit Boons here, these are again pretty standard for most builds. You take reduced damage from elites here under the Deer. For the Hawk, you want to take increased critical strike chance or increased critical strike damage because this is actually multiplicative. So depending on what you might have, a bit less of, you want to take that one. And then I personally like to have Energize here for extra spirit. You can also spec into a bit more, or gear rather, for a bit more lucky hit if you want to practice more. And then here I like to have Bolster to be able to fortify, because you'll be casting your Earthen Bulwarks quite a lot with this aspect here, the symbiotic aspect, so you should be able to cast your Earthen Bulwark quite a bit to be able to proc this. Alternatively, you can swap it for something more offensive like Avian Wrath for extra crit damage. And then lastly, you can also go with Calm Before the Storm to reduce your ultimate skill cooldown, or you can even go with Overload if you want for some extra AoE damage. But I figured the Petrify uptime might be slightly better, but it's really personal preference here. And of course, yet one more thing to talk about in Season 2 is the Vampiric Powers. And again, this is just theory crafting, and some things can still be tweaked depending on what's the most valuable. But first, I had Bathe in Blood, which is pretty much an obvious choice for any channeling build for a huge buff to damage and defense. And speaking of which, another one is the Rampart power, which gives you a barrier for standing still, which also helps with channeling skills like Lightning Storm. And some other ones are the Resilience, which is like a general, I think, pretty good defensive one. And some other ones, these I wasn't so sure about, but the first is increased damage to basically CC target, immobilize target namely, because this build does have a lot of ways to immobilize your enemies, and also with Petrify you can stun them too. So you deal increased damage to them. And then the last one here, this is kind of an interesting one, which is companions have a chance to restore 10 primary resource and increase your damage. I'm not sure how this would interact with Poison Creeper being a companion, but hopefully it'll proc a little bit more to allow you to get some more spirit regeneration. I'd like to test this out with Wolf companions and maybe even Ravens too. So potentially if you take this, you can maybe replace, say, Cyclone Armor with like Wolves or something like that for an extra 2 Wolves and some, just more companions to proc this with. But if not, you can also try swapping this out for something else for some additional damage, such as the Fortify one, or if you want to go with something like the ultimate skills, cooldown reduction might be pretty good. Casting skills heal you. I'm not sure how well this would work with Lightning Storm, but this would probably require a bit more testing anyway. And that's pretty much it for my Season 2 Druid starting progression guide. This build that I have with Lightning Storm and Landslide should allow you to start farming some of the new bosses quite readily and allow you to progress into Duriel, where you'll be able to finally farm your Tempest Roar and so forth. With that, let me know what you think about the video, or if you have anything to add down in the description box below, and I'll definitely reply to your comment. And with that, enjoy Season 2, and I will catch you on Sanctuary. Peace!